Mateo woke before dawn in the small farmhouse, the rooster's crow echoing across the quiet fields as he climbed out of his narrow wooden bed, slipping on his patched boots and tugging a woolen shawl around his shoulders against the lingering chill. Lantern light danced on the walls as he padded barefoot to the henhouse, where soft clucks greeted him, and he gathered each smooth egg with gentle fingers into a wicker basket. The air smelled of damp earth and hay as he led Bella, the old brown cow, to the milking stool, singing a low tune to calm her large, curious eyes while the first light of morning crept through the barn door. He carried the heavy pail of fresh cream across the dew-slick grass toward the farmhouse, the wooden handle warm beneath his calloused palm. In the kitchen, his mother stood by a roaring fire, stirring sweet porridge in a copper pot that glowed like molten gold, and she pressed a soft loaf of bread into his satchel with a proud smile. After breakfast, he kissed her cheek and waved to his father in the fields, where the man's strong shoulders bent low over rows of tender green shoots. Outside the gate, a narrow dirt path wound through a grove of ancient oak trees whose leaves whispered secrets overhead. Mist curled around the trunks like pale serpents as Mateo set off, each footstep stirring tiny droplets of morning dew on verdant blades of grass. Bright wildflowers, daisies, buttercups, and bluebells nodded in the breeze, and a flock of sparrows flitted past, chattering about the new day. At the crest of a gentle hill, he spotted the schoolhouse, its weathered red paint softening in the sunrise as smoke curled from the chimney. The yard brimmed with children in tidy uniforms who clustered by the stone wall, their laughter rising in light, bright bursts. Mateo's heart fluttered like a trapped bird as he approached, tugging his satchel strap to steady himself. Mrs. Baker stood at the tall oak door, her silver hair drawn into a tight bun, and her dark dress trailing like a midnight river across the wooden porch. In her right hand she held a slender ruler, its polished surface gleaming in the soft glow of morning light. At her nod, the students filed inside with quiet rustles of coats and soft thumps of leather satchels hitting the floor. Mateo stepped through the threshold into the warm, sunlit classroom where maps and charts adorned the rough plaster walls. He spotted a desk by the front window, its surface polished smooth by years of students tracing their lessons in chalk. Sliding into the wooden seat, he felt the grain pressed gently against his palms and heard the soft creak of a chair beneath him. Around him, the room was a hive of shifting glances and whispered speculations about the newcomer in patched clothes. Mrs. Baker tapped her ruler twice on the desk, and the rustling hush fell over the room like a soft blanket. She cleared her throat and asked each student to open their books to the morning lesson on arithmetic and poetry. Pages turned and pencils scratched quietly as sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating floating specks of chalk dust. Without warning, her gaze fixed on Mateo, and she asked him to stand and share the chores he had done before breakfast. He rose and spoke in a clear voice about gathering eggs, milking Bella, and helping in the garden before the sun had fully risen. Some classmates smiled politely, others exchanged curious looks, and a few whispered under their breath about the simple life of a farmer's boy. Mrs. Baker nodded thoughtfully, but then raised an eyebrow and asked why his boots were caked in fresh mud. Mateo glanced down and saw thick clumps of earth stuck to the leather, recalling the rain-soaked field where he had splashed through puddles on his way to school. He explained that early showers had turned the path to soft clay, and that he had hurried to arrive before the bell. The teacher frowned, tapped her ruler on the desk with deliberate precision, and reminded him of the strict rule about keeping the classroom clean. She instructed him to remove his boots and hold them above his head for all to see, her voice steady and unyielding. Mateo did as he was told, feeling the weight of each boot in his hands while every eye in the room followed his trembling grip. The sunbeam from the window traced a sharp line across the dusty floor, highlighting every speck of dried mud. Mrs. Baker pointed to the door and declared that anyone who broke this rule would be asked to leave until they could follow directions properly. A soft gasp rippled through the students as they processed the sudden severity of her words. Mateo's throat tightened, but he swallowed hard and bent to pick up his satchel, careful not to scuff it on the floor. He stepped toward the door with measured calm, each footfall echoing in the hushed room. The hallway beyond smelled faintly of polished wood and chalk dust, and he paused a moment under the high ceiling before continuing on. Pulling the door gently closed behind him, he felt the warmth of the classroom fade into cool silence. Outside, the schoolyard's laughter seemed distant and muted as he adjusted the strap of his satchel and gazed at the sunlit path back home. He felt his heart grow heavy as he vowed to learn from every challenge he faced. Mateo trudged along the winding dirt road toward the farmhouse under a brilliant blue sky dotted with soft white clouds, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back Even his memories of the schoolhouse hallway weighed on his mind. Golden stalks of wheat on either side bent gently in the breeze, their heads like ripe crowns nodding toward him as if offering silent encouragement. He carried his boots in one hand and his satchel in the other, careful not to scuff the leather as he replayed Mrs. Baker's stern voice reminding him of the importance of respect. A chorus of meadowlarks sang from the nearby thicket, their cheerful trills weaving through the rustling leaves above and lifting his spirits with each bright note. Wildflowers in shades of blue, yellow, and white dotted the path's edge, their petals opening wide to drink in the morning light and sprinkle color across the dusty road. When he passed the old stone fence marking his family's land, he paused to watch dew glisten on the rough surface like tiny crystals catching the dawn. He remembered how his mother's gentle touch had smoothed his hair and how her warm kitchen had smelled of fresh bread and sweet porridge before he left that morning. Beyond the fence lay neat rows of vegetables, tomatoes, beans, and squash, each plant reaching skyward in healthy green curiosity under his father's careful hand. The red barn gleamed in the distance after last night's rain washed the dust from its walls, and he pictured the soft lowing of Bella waiting inside. Mateo set his satchel down on a flat stone beside the path and knelt to rinse the mud from his boots in a shallow creek, the cool water slipping over his fingers as he worked. Each grain of soil that washed away felt like a small victory, and he watched the water swirl into tiny whirlpools before flowing onward toward the river. After cleaning them thoroughly, he propped the boots on the stone ledge to dry, its sun-warmed surface promising a fresh start for tomorrow's return. He slung his satchel across his back again and resumed walking, taking in the scent of wild mint and clover that filled the air with sweet freshness. Overhead, clouds drifted lazily across the sky, casting shifting patches of shade across the fields as if painting moving pictures on the earth. Near the farmhouse gate, a pair of sparrows darted ahead of him, chattering softly as they flitted from fence post to oak branch. His father stood by the gate, leaning on a sturdy pitchfork, and offered a proud nod that spoke louder than any words could about learning from mistakes. Steam curled from a kettle perched on the hearth in the kitchen window, hinting at the warm tea and rich porridge waiting inside. When he entered the kitchen, his mother greeted him with a gentle smile and set a steaming bowl of porridge before him, its surface rippling with golden honey. Mateo took a deep breath and inhaled the sweet aroma, letting it soothe the tight knot in his chest before tasting the warm, comforting meal. His mother's hand found his shoulder, and she whispered that every challenge was a lesson in disguise if one chose to learn from it. His father joined them at the table, placing a firm but gentle hand over Mateo's and praising his courage to accept responsibility. Over their meal of porridge and fresh bread, they talked about the next day's plan. He would polish his boots, arrive early to sweep the porch, and greet Mrs. Baker with respect. After they finished eating, Mateo carried his empty bowl to the sink, the soft scrape of wood and porcelain echoing in the quiet kitchen. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and distant rumbles of thunder warned of an afternoon storm approaching fast. He donned his raincoat and stepped into the yard, where the first heavy drops of rain splattered on the dry earth with sharp patters. Working alongside his father, he gathered fallen branches from the orchard and stacked them neatly by the barn for firewood. Then he led Bella into the shelter of her stall, brushing her soft muzzle and speaking calm words as she munched on fresh hay. The storm's winds rattled the barn boards, but inside the air stayed warm and safe as Mateo closed the heavy door behind him. He settled on a clean bale of hay and reopened his notebook to review the words he had written about respect, honesty, and perseverance. Reading each line aloud in a steady voice, he felt the meaning settle in his mind like seeds planted in rich soil. The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, its soft rhythm on the roof a soothing backdrop to his thoughtful reflections. His father's call came through the wood, supper was ready, and he rose carefully, brushing stray hay from his coat. In the lantern-lit kitchen, a hearty stew bubbled on the stove and fresh loaves of bread awaited on the sideboard. Mateo ate slowly, each bite reminding him of his family's support and the strength he found in kindness and hard work. Before bedtime, he helped clear the table and wash dishes until every pan and pot shone under the flickering lamplight. He then stepped outside to check on the fields, where puddles glimmered in the barnyard, and the rain had made tiny rivulets in the path. Shafts of moonlight peeked through parting clouds, turning wet leaves into silver filigree that sparkled against the dark green. He stood under the old oak tree at the edge of the yard and took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling calm and determined. Mateo pictured the schoolhouse door and imagined himself sweeping the porch clean and greeting Mrs. Baker with a respectful bow tomorrow morning. Carefully, he laid his notebook and boots by the hearth before crawling into bed, ready to rest and face the next day with renewed courage. Mateo woke at dawn under a sky still brushed with deep blue hues, his mind swirling with plans to return to school with boots polished to a bright shine and respect radiating from his posture, determined to prove he had learned from his mistake. He tiptoed past the kitchen where his mother stirred steaming porridge in a copper pot, its sweet steam curling into the air as the warm, earthy scent of fresh bread filled the room and urged him forward. His father waited at the farmhouse door with a proud nod, holding a pail of milk still warm for Bella's udder, and pressed it into Mateo's hands with rough kindness, reminding him to drink and find strength for the coming day. The winding dirt road stretched before him like a golden ribbon, bordered on both sides by tall wheat stalks whispering in the breeze and bright wildflowers nodding their heads as if cheering him on. A distant hum drifted through the crisp morning air, growing louder with every step like the steady buzz of a giant hornet, and Mateo paused to tilt his head and watch the sky. Above the schoolhouse's red roof, a helicopter appeared, its rotors spinning in perfect rhythm and its polished body reflecting the first light of sunrise like a brilliant metal bird. He quickened his pace, heart pounding, as children spilled into the courtyard with gasps and cheers, their faces lit by excitement and disbelief at the unexpected visitor hovering above. The helicopter descended slowly toward the grassy lawn, stirring a swirl of dust and loose leaves that danced around the landing skids in a wild, swirling circle. Mrs. Baker emerged from the classroom door in her dark dress and silver bun, her stern eyebrows lifting skyward as she surveyed the humming machine with equal parts curiosity and caution. Students formed a wide semicircle around the landing area, their chatter hushed into stunned silence as the craft settled with a gentle thud on the soft green grass. A side door slid open with a hiss, revealing a pilot in crisp uniform whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the buzzing blades above. He descended the ramp with steady hands, nodding politely to the children as he approached, and they watched in wide-eyed wonder at every careful movement. From the doorway behind him stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, silver hair gleaming, his kind eyes scanning the courtyard with a warm smile that seemed to light up the entire schoolyard. Mateo recognized him immediately as his grandfather, and felt a rush of pride and excitement surge through his veins as the man raised a polished cane in greeting. Mrs. Baker stepped forward with cautious respect, and the grandfather bowed slightly before offering apologies for the surprise landing and thanks for the lessons she had taught his grandson. He reached into an inside pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small velvet-lined case, holding it out like a precious treasure for all to see. Children leaned forward on their toes as Mrs. Baker opened the case to reveal a gleaming silver compass etched with intricate designs, its glass face glowing in the sunlight. She lifted the compass high and explained that it would always point not just north but toward courage, honesty, and kindness whenever Mateo felt uncertain of his path. Gasps of delight rose among the students, and they clapped and cheered as the grandfather handed the compass gently to Mateo, who cradled it in his palm as if it were made of light itself. The pilot signaled that the helicopter awaited, and with a crisp salute he began climbing back up the ramp, the blades spinning faster as he prepared for departure. Dust swirled again as the helicopter lifted from the ground, carrying the grandfather's thoughtful gift away in its steady humming ascent. Mrs. Baker called for silence, and then praised Mateo's courage in facing his mistake, reminding everyone that every challenge was an opportunity to learn and grow. She invited Mateo to stand beside her and hold the compass as she announced that he would help maintain classroom order and set an example of respect for his classmates. With a steady breath, he stepped forward, clutching the compass close to his chest and meeting the eyes of his peers who watched him with newfound admiration. His classmates nodded and smiled, some offering quiet words of encouragement while others simply beamed, their earlier whispers of doubt replaced by warm gestures of friendship. The grandfather paused on the helicopter's skid to tip his hat once more before turning to climb aboard, his proud gaze fixed on Mateo until the last possible moment. As the aircraft disappeared into the bright morning sky, the schoolyard returned to its normal hush, filled now with a sense of wonder and renewed hope. Mrs. Baker led the students back into the classroom, where the compass found its place on a shelf beside the chalkboard as a reminder of respect, second chances, and the strength found in learning. Lessons resumed with arithmetic problems and poetry readings, but the room felt different, lighter and brighter, as students passed curious glances toward the small silver compass. Mateo opened his math book with careful hands, placing the compass gently on his desk so its shining face caught the sunbeams streaming through the window. Each pencil stroke that morning felt guided by the compass's promise of courage, and he smiled quietly as numbers and words aligned in neat, confident lines. When recess bell rang, children poured into the courtyard anew, but this time they greeted Mateo with friendly waves and invitations to join in games of tag and jump rope. He ran alongside classmates, his laughter mingling with theirs under the open sky, the compass bouncing softly in his pocket like a steady heartbeat. As they played near the ancient oak tree, he glanced down at the compass and felt the needle point toward kindness and honesty, guiding his steps both on and off the playground. At midday, the students returned for a poetry lesson, and Mrs. Baker wrote lines about respect and empathy on the chalkboard while sunlight made the compass gleam like a star. When it was his turn, Mateo read a simple poem about seeds growing into tall trees, his voice clear and steady, filled with the confidence he had earned through facing his mistake. The class applauded warmly as he finished, and classmates patted him on the back, their smiles bright and supportive under the watchful gaze of the teacher. As the final bell rang for the day, Mateo packed his satchel with a light heart, the compass resting beside his notebooks as a silent promise of continued growth. He walked toward home beneath a sky painted in soft pink and orange hues, each step steady and sure, guided by the silver needle that pointed him toward courage and truth. By the time he reached the farmhouse gate, he knew he had faced his challenge, earned respect, and discovered that with honesty and kindness to guide him, every new day offered a fresh start. The next morning, Mateo rose before dawn, eager to return to school and confident in the promise of a fresh start. He slipped into the barn to retrieve his boots from the stone ledge where they had dried under the rising sun. In the kitchen, his mother set a steaming bowl of porridge before him and beamed with pride at his determination. His father appeared at the door, nodded approvingly, and reminded Mateo that true strength comes from learning. After breakfast, Mateo gathered a soft brush, a broom, and a cloth to prepare the classroom for the day. He walked along the familiar dirt path, the satchel on his back feeling lighter than ever before. When he arrived at the schoolyard, he found it empty and still, as if waiting just for him. Mateo swept the porch with smooth, steady strokes until every stray leaf lay in neat piles at the side. He dusted the welcome mat until its faded pattern glowed under the morning light. Inside the classroom, he wiped each desk surface, erasing yesterday's footprints from every corner. He straightened the rows of chairs until they formed perfect lines facing the blackboard. He picked up chalk and erasers, stacking them neatly on Mrs. Baker's desk. A bird's song drifted through the open window as he worked in quiet focus. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and Mateo looked up to see Mrs. Baker at the door. Her eyes widened with surprise at the spotless room and the new calm in the air. He stood and bowed respectfully, offering her the dusting cloth with both hands. Mrs. Baker crossed her arms and allowed herself a small, warm smile of approval. She invited him to help welcome the other students as they arrived. Soon, classmates began trickling into the yard, their chatter turning to silence as they noticed the clean desks. They exchanged curious glances and whispered about the farmer's son-turned-helper. One by one, they greeted Mateo with shy nods and polite hellos. He led them inside and showed them to their seats, pointing out the tidy rows. Mrs. Baker began the morning lesson on grammar, and Mateo passed out exercise sheets. During arithmetic, he wrote sample problems on the board in neat, confident numbers. When a classmate hesitated, he leaned over to offer a quiet explanation. In poetry time, he read aloud a verse about kindness and second chances. His clear voice carried to every corner, and the room felt warm with shared understanding. At recess, children gathered around him, asking how he had learned to sweep so well. He demonstrated the proper grip and gentle arc of the broom's bristles. A few classmates joined him in sweeping, eager to help keep the room neat. When the bell rang for lunch, Mateo returned to his desk and unpacked his simple meal. Mrs. Baker praised his efforts during the midday check, calling him example to all. His cheeks warmed with pride at her kind words. In the afternoon, he helped organize supplies, placing pencils, rulers, and paper in their proper spots. Each book on the shelf lay flat and in order, their spines aligned like soldiers on parade. Before departing, he extinguished the lantern and closed the door with a soft click. He took one last look at the classroom, noting how bright and welcoming it felt. Outside, the sky was painted in soft pinks and oranges as the day drew to a close. Mateo walked home with a steady step and a quiet smile, knowing he had done well. He felt ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. In the golden afternoon light, the classroom felt alive with quiet energy as sunlight streamed through tall windows and danced across rows of polished desks where students prepared for the next lesson with bright, curious faces. Mrs. Baker stood by the chalkboard, her silver hair catching the glow of the sun, as she smiled gently at Mateo before inviting him to share the magic compas's story with the entire class. He rose confidently, holding the compass in both hands, and described how his grandfather's gift had taught him that honesty and respect could guide a person better than any map. His classmates listened intently, their eyes wide and their breath caught as they imagined the compass pointing not north but toward kindness in every act. After he finished, Mrs. Baker nodded and asked the students to form small groups for an activity illustrating courage through drawing or writing. Mateo found himself paired with Lily, a shy girl who rarely spoke. He offered her a warm smile as they gathered paper and colored pencils. Together they sketched a scene of two friends helping each other across a wobbly wooden bridge, whispering ideas and laughing softly as colors filled the page. Nearby, other groups painted stories of helping hands, brave hearts, and bright lanterns lighting a dark path, each student using the compass's message as inspiration. When the activity ended, Mrs. Baker displayed every drawing on the classroom wall like a gallery celebrating character and teamwork. Mateo noticed Lily's picture hanging between two others, its gentle strokes reflecting her quiet courage, and he felt proud to have helped her find her voice. The bell rang for recess, and the children spilled into the schoolyard with joyful shouts, their chatter rising like a flock of excited birds. Mateo tucked the compass safely into his satchel and joined a game of hopscotch, where he and his classmates laughed as they hopped over chalk lines drawn in bright pastel shades. At the oak tree by the fence, he paused to tie his shoelaces, noticing how the leaves shimmered in the wind and how the compass's silver chain caught a glint of sunlight. Below the tree, Lily shyly approached and thanked him for working together, her soft voice filled with hope and warmth. He nodded and invited her to play by his side, and together they skipped stones across a puddle left by yesterday's rain, watching ripples spread like smiles. When recess ended, he returned to the classroom with a smile, placing the compass upright on its small wooden stand for all to admire. Mrs. Baker began a science lesson on plant growth, pointing to the green sprouts outside the window as she spoke about sunlight, water, and care guiding each seed toward its full bloom. Throughout the lesson, Mateo traced gentle circles on the desk with his fingertip, remembering how the compass's needle had guided him toward respect and responsibility. As they studied the plant's roots reaching deep beneath the soil, he thought about how kindness and humility could anchor a person's character firmly in any storm. After the lesson, Mrs. Baker invited questions, and Mateo raised his hand confidently to ask how they could nurture courage in everyday choices beyond the classroom. She smiled and explained that every kind word, every honest action, and every respectful gesture acted like water and sunlight, helping courage grow inside a person's heart. The students nodded and began to share examples of when they had stood up for a friend, admitted mistakes, or offered help without being asked. Hearing these stories, Mateo felt a warm glow inside, knowing that the compass's lesson had already begun to guide his peers in small but meaningful ways. At lunchtime, the children lined up at the kitchen door, and Mateo carried a tray of fresh soup and bread to share with anyone who looked hungry or lonely. He noticed Sam, who sometimes sat alone, and offered him an extra piece of bread with a friendly nod that brought a grateful smile to Sam's face. Across the table, Lily sat with a handful of friends who talked about the drawing they had created together, their voices bright and full of laughter. After eating, Mateo and his classmates cleared the dishes, stacking bowls and wiping tables until the kitchen looked as neat as it had in the morning. Returning to the classroom, they prepared for afternoon reading, and Mrs. Baker chose a story about a young explorer who learned that the bravest journeys begin with a single brave step. Mateo listened as each page turned, picturing the explorer guided by a magical compass that pointed toward truth, friendship, and courage in every new land. When the story ended, he closed his eyes and imagined what new adventures he could face if he always followed the compass of his heart. Mrs. Baker then assigned a writing exercise asking students to describe a time they overcame fear, and Mateo set to work with quiet excitement. His pencil moved swiftly across the paper as he wrote about the day. He had held up his muddy boots, faced the rule with respect, and found a fresh start guided by his grandfather's gift. Each word he wrote felt like another step on his journey, and he smiled as his story filled the page with lessons and hopes for the future. When he finished, he read his work aloud to the class, his clear voice carrying pride and honesty in every phrase. The room filled with gentle applause, and classmates nodded in recognition of the courage it had taken to share his experience. Mrs. Baker praised his writing and reminded everyone that a true compass guided not just through maps but through the choices of daily life. The final bell rang for the day, and Mateo carefully placed his paper in a folder before retrieving the compass from the desk stand. He handed the compass to Mrs. Baker for safekeeping, knowing that tomorrow it would return to his hand when he was ready to lead again. Students gathered their belongings, and as they filed out of the room, they offered friendly nods and words of encouragement to their farmer's son friend. With a steady smile, Mateo stepped into the hallway, ready to carry the compass's message of kindness and respect into every tomorrow. Mrs. Baker announced a special science field trip to Mateo's family farm, surprising the class with excited gasps and eager chatter as they prepared for a hands-on lesson about nature and agriculture under the open sky. Early the next morning, a horse-drawn wooden cart waited by the schoolhouse, its wheels greased and polished, ready to carry the students across rolling fields toward the red-roofed barn that gleamed under the bright sun. Each child climbed aboard with wide eyes and buzzing excitement, settling into the cart's bench seats as Mrs. Baker took her place at the front to lead the journey with a gentle reminder about listening and respect. Mateo sat near the driver, his heart swelling with pride as he felt the familiar rumble of the wagon floor beneath him and saw the path unfurl through waving wheat fields that stretched toward the horizon. Along the way, the students pointed at flocks of birds circling overhead and clusters of deer grazing near the tree line, marveling at the beauty of the countryside that Mateo called home. When they arrived at the farmhouse gate, his father greeted the group with a warm handshake for each student and a proud nod to Mrs. Baker for organizing the trip. Inside the barn, Mateo introduced his classmates to Bella the cow, explaining how he gently milked her each morning, and he demonstrated the proper technique for securing a clean pail under her warm udder. Some students tried milking Mrs. Baker's demonstration jug, laughing when the milk spurted unexpectedly, while others took turns brushing Bella's brown coat until it shone like polished wood. Next, they moved to the chicken coop, where Mateo showed them how to collect eggs carefully without cracking the shells, and the children marveled at the smooth, speckled patterns on each egg surface. He explained how each variety of chicken laid a slightly different colored egg, and how the hens clucked softly to alert him when a new egg was ready to be gathered. After that, Mrs. Baker guided the class to the orchard, where ripe apples hung heavy on low branches, and Mateo taught everyone how to pick the fruit gently to avoid bruises while testing sweetness by tasting a sample. The students bit into crisp apples that snapped pleasantly between their teeth, enjoying the fresh flavor as the breeze carried the scent of blossoms and earth across the sunlit yard. From the orchard, they walked to the garden beds, where rows of vegetables, tomatoes, peas, and squash grew in tidy lines, and Mateo explained how his parents nurtured each plant from seed to harvest. He demonstrated how to gently loosen soil around young seedlings before transplanting them, and how to prune tomato vines without damaging future fruit. A few students tried carrying watering cans down the furrows, learning how proper technique ensured even water distribution and healthy growth under the summer sun. Then Mrs. Baker called everyone together near the beehive boxes, and Mateo offered safe instructions about wearing protective gear, explaining how bees communicated through dances to show their friends where flowers bloomed. Each student donned a mesh veil and gloves, watching in fascinated silence as Mateo gently lifted a frame of honeycomb, pointing out the hexagonal cells filled with golden honey. He cracked off a small piece of comb for tasting, and the class sampled sweet honey that dripped warmly from their fingers as they giggled at the sticky treat. As midday sun climbed overhead, they gathered under the shade of the old oak tree for a picnic lunch of fresh bread, cheese, and the honey they had tasted, sharing stories and laughter on checkered blankets. Mrs. Baker complimented Mateo on his role as guide and appreciated how he represented the compass of respect with patience and clear explanations. After lunch, they returned to the field to sketch what they had seen, spreading paper on easels and using colored pencils to capture the vivid colors of farm life around them. Blank pages filled quickly with images of cows, beehives, orchards, and smiling faces, each drawing echoing lessons about nature's rhythms and the importance of caring for the environment. Mateo paused to help Sam correct a shaky line in his drawing of Bella, offering gentle pointers on how to shade fur and capture her kind eyes. Lily showed him her painting of the orchard bathed in morning sunlight, and he praised her use of warm hues and delicate strokes that brought the scene to life. When the drawings were complete, they hung them on a makeshift art display strung between two sturdy fence posts, turning the farm into an open-air gallery for families to admire. Neighbors strolled by and complimented the students on their artwork, and some even stayed to ask Mateo questions about the farm's daily routines and seasonal cycles. As the field trip drew to a close, Mrs. Baker gathered the group to reflect on what they had learned, and each student shared a moment when they felt respect deepen for the land, the animals, or their classmates. Many spoke of newfound curiosity about where food comes from, of gratitude for farmers' hard work, and of the joy of learning outside the classroom walls. Before departing, Mateo presented Mrs. Baker with a small jar of honey from his family's hives, thanking her for guiding their education with wisdom and kindness. The teacher accepted the gift with a heartfelt smile, promising to remember this day whenever she saw that shining jar sitting on her desk. Mounted back on the wagon, the students waved goodbye to the farmhouse as they rumbled down the road towards school, their voices carrying excitement for tomorrow's lessons. Along the way, they passed the compass carved into a wooden sign by Mateo's grandfather, its arrow pointing toward the farm that had taught them so much that day. As they approached the schoolyard, they hopped off the wagon and formed a line before the classroom door, their satchels rustling and hearts full of fresh knowledge. Mrs. Baker praised each child for their respectful behavior during the trip and announced that they would write essays about their experiences to share in the next English lesson. Back in the sunlit classroom, desks arranged in neat rows once more, the teacher placed the honey jar on her desk beside the silver compass as symbols of gratitude and guidance. The students opened their notebooks and began drafting stories about the day's adventures, their pens moving in smooth lines fueled by enthusiasm and clear memories. Mateo looked around at his classmates' eager faces and felt a warm glow of satisfaction, knowing that the day's lessons would stay with him long after the honey had been eaten. When the final bell rang, he packed his satchel under the watchful eye of the compass, his mind buzzing with ideas for future lessons and ways to help others learn. Walking home through the golden afternoon light, he reflected on how respect, kindness, and a willingness to share his world had opened new doors for himself and his classmates. He carried the memory of the field trip like a treasure, understanding that real learning could happen anywhere when guided by curiosity and a compassionate heart. The following morning, the students gathered their notebooks and pencils, ready to begin a writing assignment that would capture their memories and lessons from the farm visit as sunlight warmed their shoulders. Mrs. Baker explained that each essay should include a clear introduction, vivid details, and a reflection on how respect for nature and teamwork had guided their day. She reminded them to organize their thoughts into paragraphs and to choose words that would paint pictures in the reader's mind. Mateo opened his notebook and watched his classmates dip their pens into ink wells, the soft scratch of nibs on paper filling the quiet room. He closed his eyes briefly to recall the scent of fresh hay, the glow of the sun on silken cow fur, and the golden honey dripping from the comb. Then he began writing about the morning dew glistening on wheat fields, comparing each droplet to tiny mirrors reflecting the promise of new beginnings. Next, he described the sound of bees buzzing around the hive, noting how their careful dances revealed hidden flowers blooming in secret corners of the garden. With precise details, he recounted the feel of the wooden cart's bump against ruts in the road and the laughter that rose when classmates helped each other find steady footing. He wrote about the way neighbors had smiled and offered friendly waves, illustrating how community spirit had made the day feel like a shared celebration. Mateo paused to reflect on the compass's lesson, noting how its needle had pointed him toward honesty when he admitted his mistake in class. He described how that simple act had led to new friendships. His classmates approached him with curious questions and warm smiles. Through careful sentences, he showed how Lily's quiet courage had blossomed into confidence when she stood to show her art to the group. He wrote about Sam's grateful eyes when he offered an extra slice of bread at lunch, capturing the moment's gentle kindness. As his pen glided across the page, he noted how the oak tree's sturdy branches had sheltered their picnic, standing like a wise old friend. His next paragraph detailed the sensation of honey on his tongue, sweet and warm, reminding him that life's small pleasures often bring the greatest joy. He described the patterns on the apple skins and how each bite had burst with crisp, tangy flavor under the summer sun. Turning to the science experiments they conducted, he wrote about the careful measurements, the bubbling mixtures, and the thrill of discovery when each hypothesis proved correct. In another section, he reflected on the teamwork required to herd Bella safely, noting how each child's calm voice had guided the gentle cow back to the stall. He contrasted that collaboration with the moment he had first held his muddy boots above his head, illustrating how responsibility and respect go hand in hand. Mateo included vivid descriptions of the hive frames he had held, hexagonal cells filled with glistening honey and busy worker bees tending to their young. He wrote about the feeling of brushing soft hen feathers in the coop, the gentle tickles on his palm, reminding him of the delicate balance of nature. His pen flowed as he recounted how the falling apples had rolled down the slope like small, sunlit planets orbiting hidden stars. He depicted the classroom upon their return, where coiled layouts of desks sprawled like puzzle pieces waiting for new voices to fill them. With introspective tone, he explained how that essay moment had taught him that writing is a kind of map for the heart's journeys. He then reviewed his work, checking each sentence for clarity and making sure every detail served to guide the reader toward the day's meaning. After finishing his draft, he passed it to Lily for peer review, and she circled phrases she liked with neat pink pencil marks. She suggested he expand on the moment he had tasted honey, and he agreed, adding a few more sensory words to deepen the imagery. Sam then looked over the essay and underlined his favorite lines about community care, nodding in appreciation of the message. Mrs. Baker walked among the students, offering gentle feedback and praising their thoughtful reflections on respect and responsibility. She reminded them that sharing their stories could inspire others to follow the compass of kindness in their daily lives. When the final drafts were ready, each student read their essay aloud to the class, their voices weaving a tapestry of experiences and insights. Mateo listened to his classmates' readings with admiration, hearing echoes of his own lessons in their words and feeling united by common values. Tears glistened in his eyes when he spoke, not of sadness but of gratitude for the chance to grow and learn together under Mrs. Baker's guidance. As the clock chimed noon, the teacher collected the essays to create a class anthology that would be bound and displayed in the school library. The students cheered at the idea of their stories becoming part of the school's legacy, knowing that future classes would read about their adventures. Mateo carefully placed his essay at the top of the stack, hoping his words would remind others to listen, learn, and show respect wherever they go. That afternoon, the class gathered in a circle under the oak tree to enact scenes from their essays, with each student taking a turn to role-play an important moment. Laughter and applause filled the air as classmates reenacted milking Bella, collecting honey, and painting orchard scenes, bringing their words to life. When the sun dipped low, Mrs. Baker called them back to the classroom for one final reflection on how writing in action could shape a better world. With pens poised over fresh pages, the students set new goals for learning, kindness, and respect, ready to follow the compass of their hearts into every tomorrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting soft pink light across the fields, Mateo gathered his satchel and compass and prepared to walk home. His heart felt full as he remembered the day's lessons on respect, kindness, and the gentle rhythms of farm life. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, feeling the weight of his notebook and the small silver compass tucked safely inside. The path home was lined with tall grasses that swayed in the evening breeze like silent dancers. Fireflies began to flicker among the blades, their tiny lights blinking like distant stars at ground level. Mateo paused by the old oak tree where he had sketched pictures with his classmates, its strong branches now dark silhouettes against the twilight sky. He touched the bark gently, recalling how the tree had sheltered the class during lunch and storytelling. A soft chirp of crickets filled the air, and he felt a quiet sense of calm wash over him. He thought of Mrs. Baker's kind smile when she praised his writing, and of the way his grandfather's compass had guided him back to respect. Each step felt steady and sure as the fields stretched out on either side like golden waves under the dimming light. He remembered the laughter in the barn loft and the way sunlight had glinted off the honeycomb as he tasted fresh honey for the first time. The memory brought a gentle smile to his face as he walked past the chicken coop where the hens had clucked softly. He heard the distant lowing of Bella the cow, and he hurried toward the open gate where his father waited. His father stood in the farmhouse doorway, lean and strong, holding the lantern high so Mateo could see the path clearly. Mother's warm light glowed through the kitchen window, promising the scent of hot porridge and fresh bread. As he approached, his father stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. Inside the kitchen, his mother rose to welcome him, the copper pot still warming the kitchen with the sweet aroma of simmering porridge. Mateo set aside his satchel and pulled out the compass, placing it carefully on the wooden table. He shared the compass's story once more, telling his parents how its needle guided him toward honesty and courage. His mother beamed and placed a gentle hand on his cheek, and his father nodded as he ladled warm porridge into a bowl. After dinner, Mateo washed the dishes and helped sweep the kitchen floor until every corner was clear of crumbs and dust. Then he climbed the stairs to his small bedroom under the eaves, where his bed waited beneath a window that looked out over the farm. He opened his notebook and wrote down new goals for school and for growing kindness in his daily life. Each line of writing felt like planting a seed, ready to grow under the careful watering of practice and thought. He traced the compass's design on the page and wrote a short note reminding himself to let respect guide his actions. Satisfied, he closed the notebook and set it beside his bed, tucking the silver compass into the small wooden box his grandfather had given him. He leaned against the window frame and looked out at the moonlit fields, where shadows danced among the tall grass. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. Mateo closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling grateful for the day's adventures and lessons. He whispered a silent promise to wake early tomorrow and continue learning with an open heart and respectful spirit. With one last glance at the compass on the bedside table, he crawled into his warm blanket and closed his eyes. Outside his window, the farm grew quiet, the only sounds the steady hum of night insects and the distant hoot of an owl. In his dreams, he saw the schoolhouse filled with smiling faces and the red barn shining in morning light. He dreamed of guiding younger students in sweeping the porch and sharing honey from the hive with shy friends. The compass glowed softly in his hand, pointing toward new challenges and the courage to face them. When dawn came, he would rise with the birds, ready to greet a fresh day under the watchful guidance of his family and teachers. He felt certain that every step he took, every task he completed, and every kind word he spoke would help him grow into a person of honor. And he knew that by remembering the lessons of respect and responsibility, he would carry the farm's wisdom with him wherever he went. The final flicker of the night lamp faded as Mateo drifted into deep sleep, his mind at peace and his heart full of hope. Tomorrow, he would follow the compass of his heart into a new adventure, ready to learn and ready to serve.